The grand doors of the Manhattan Charity Gala swung open, and every head turned toward Claire Henderson. Diamonds caught the chandelier light. Her hand rested possessively on the arm of a male model nearly 10 years her junior. She smiled at the cameras, then leaned into the microphone with a laugh, sharp enough to cut glass. "My ex-husband." "Oh, please." A boring single dad who lives between the kitchen and the school pickup line. Laughter rippled through New York's elite. Jacob Miller stood frozen near the entrance, then vanished into the cold marble corridor under 100 pitying stares. Minutes later, a hush fell across the ballroom, slow-heavy, almost reverent. The string quartet faltered mid-note. Glasses paused halfway to painted lips. Jacob Miller had returned. And the woman walking beside him was someone no one in that room had ever expected to see on his arm. 3 hours before that hush fell over the ballroom, the snow over Chicago had just begun to soften the city into white. Jacob Miller stood at the window of a brownstone on the quiet end of Lincoln Park, knotting a black tie he had not worn in almost 2 years. The mirror gave back a man in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, slightly tired around the eyes, with the kind of stillness that came from picking up the same lunchbox every morning and reading the same bedtime book every night. He did not look like a man on his way to one of the most photographed galas of the year. He looked like a man on his way to a parent-teacher conference. A small voice broke the quiet behind him. "Daddy, your tie is crooked again." He turned. His daughter Lily, 8 years old, stood in the doorway, in pajamas patterned with little astronauts, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. She had her mother's dark hair and his stubborn jaw, and she was looking at him with the gravity only a child can manage. "Is it really?" he asked. "It's leaning, like a tree in the wind." He crouched, and she came to him with serious little fingers and tried to straighten what she could not possibly straighten. He let her. He always let her. After a long moment, he kissed the top of her head. "How does it look now?" "Better. Are you going to see Mommy?" The word landed soft, but it landed. "Yes." "Will you be home tomorrow?" "First flight in the morning." She considered that. "Tell Mommy I drew her a horse." "I will." He had told himself 100 times on the flight to New York that he was going only because Lily had asked. Claire had been clever about it. She had called 2 weeks before, voice unusually gentle, saying their daughter wanted to see her parents in the same room again, even just for a night. She had said it would mean the world to Lily. She had said Jacob owed her this after everything. He had not argued. He did not argue anymore. His phone buzzed on the dresser as he reached for his coat. An email from his old firm in Manhattan, the third that week, asking when he was coming back, whether the sabbatical was finally over. He glanced at it, locked the screen, and slid the phone into his pocket. Not tonight. The ballroom on Park Avenue glittered like something out of a magazine that printed only on heavy paper. Crystal chandeliers spilled honey-colored light over marble. Waiters glided between knots of senators and hedge fund managers and women whose gowns had been flown in from Paris that morning. Cameras hovered near the entrance, hungry for whoever walked through next. Jacob walked through next. He drew no flashes. He drew nothing at all. He moved along the edge of the room as he had learned to move through every room since the divorce, quietly, politely taking up as little space as a man his size could. He found Claire near the center. She had positioned herself, as always, directly beneath the largest chandelier. Her gown was the color of cut sapphire. Her hair had been swept up into something architectural, and on her arm was a man Jacob recognized from a billboard he had driven past in Chicago the week before, a cologne advertisement, the model leaning shirtless against a black motorcycle. In person, the boy looked even younger than the billboard, perhaps 30. He smiled with very white teeth and very little behind them. His name, Jacob would learn later from a passing waiter, was Brandon Cole. Claire saw Jacob and something tightened at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile. "Jacob." Her voice rose loud enough for the nearest cluster to hear. "You actually came." "Lily wanted me to." "Of course she did." She turned to Brandon. "Darling, this is Jacob. My ex. He's the one I told you about, the boring one." Brandon laughed politely, the laugh of a man who does not understand the joke, but understands who is paying for the table. Jacob felt the room slide a quarter-inch sideways. He did not respond. He had learned in the long year of paperwork and custody hearings that responding to Claire in public was like trying to win an argument with a hurricane. "You only got wet." A woman from a finance magazine stepped closer with a recorder. "Mrs. Henderson, a few words for our readers. They're loving the new chapter." Claire's chin lifted. "The new chapter is wonderful. I think a lot of women in my position settle, you know. They marry someone steady, someone safe, and one day they wake up at 40 and realize they have spent a decade making sandwiches for a man who never wanted more than a kitchen and a school calendar." The cluster around her laughed. The reporter wrote it down word for word. Two younger women near the bar leaned toward each other behind their flutes, and one of them whispered something Jacob could not hear, but felt anyway the soft, particular cruelty of strangers deciding what kind of man you must be. A trustee from a museum board he had once consulted for caught his eye from across the room. The trustee looked at him, then looked deliberately away the way people look away from an old friend they would rather not have to greet in front of better company. "I'm going to get some air," Jacob said to no one in particular, and turned toward the corridor. He almost made it. He stood in the marble hall for some time. He did not know how long. Long enough for the cold of the stone to come up through his shoes. Long enough for the laughter from the ballroom to fade, and rise, and fade again, like weather. He thought once about calling a cab. He thought once about calling Lily. He did neither. He stood with his hand against the wall and waited for his pulse to come down to a rate he recognized. His phone vibrated against his ribs. He pulled it out already braced to ignore whoever it was. The name on the screen stopped him. Vanessa Brooks. He had not spoken to her in more than 2 years. Not since he had walked into her glass-walled office in Midtown and told her quietly and with no apology that he was stepping back from the firm to raise his daughter. She had listened without interrupting. She had told him when he was done that the door would stay open for as long as he needed it to. She had told him she did not hire architects, she hired men, and the kind of man who could walk away from a corner office to read bedtime stories was the kind of man she would wait on. He had not believed her at the time. Most things people said in offices like that they did not mean. He answered, "Jacob." Her voice was the same low, dry, precise, the voice of someone who had never raised it once in 20 years of boardrooms because she had never needed to. "Tell me you're still in New York." "I'm in the building." "Good. My driver is fighting the snow on Madison. 10 minutes, maybe 12. I need you in that room when I walk in." He looked back the way he had come. The laughter from the ballroom rolled faintly down the corridor. "Vanessa, this is not a great night for me. I know whose gala it is. I read the guest list this morning." A small silence held the line. "Jacob, I am presenting the Riverside project tonight. To the board, to the press, to half the money on the East Coast. I am presenting your design. I would like you standing next to it." He closed his eyes. The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere behind him, a waiter set down a tray of glasses with a small, bright sound. Somewhere ahead of him, beyond the gold doors, his ex-wife was telling a room full of cameras that he was a man who had never wanted more than a kitchen. "Do not make me walk in alone," Vanessa said. He opened his eyes. "All right." He slid the phone back into his pocket and stood for a moment in that cold stone hallway, listening to the heartbeat of a party that had decided what kind of man he was without ever asking him. He thought of Lily back in Chicago, asleep by now, the stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. He thought of the horse she had drawn for her mother, folded carefully in his coat pocket. He thought of every dinner he had cooked, every fever he had stayed up through, every drawing he had set aside in a drawer because a small girl had needed him more than a skyline had. He had never been ashamed of any of it. He was not going to start being ashamed of it tonight. He turned. He walked without hurry back toward the doors he had just left. The marble was cold under his shoes. The music had begun to swell again behind the gilded panels, and somewhere in that swelling, Claire was laughing. And somewhere in that laughter, she did not yet know that the man she had spent the evening burying had just decided to stand up. He met Vanessa Brooks at the top of the marble steps just outside the ballroom. She had not changed in 2 years. Tall, in a long charcoal gown, cut without a single ornament, her dark hair pulled back into a low knot. No jewelry except a thin gold band at her wrist that Jacob remembered her wearing in every meeting they had ever shared. She had brought no entourage, no assistant trailing with a tablet. She had walked in alone as she walked into everything alone. She looked at him for a long second. "You look tired," she said. "It has been a long hour." "Then let us make it a shorter one." She did not take his arm. She did not need to. She simply turned and started walking, and he fell into step beside her. And that was how they came back through the gold-leafed doors into the heat of the room. The first to notice was a hedge fund manager standing nearest the entrance. His glass stopped halfway to his mouth. The woman beside him followed his line of sight, then a man on her left, and then the whole near corner of the ballroom turned at once, like a field of wheat, tilting in a sudden wind. The string quartet faltered. Conversation died in widening rings. Vanessa did not slow. She moved through that opening crowd the way a current moves through, still water, nodding at one face, touching another lightly on the elbow, never breaking pace. The trustee who had looked away from Jacob 10 minutes earlier now looked again, and this time his face did something complicated. Near the center of the room, beneath her chandelier, Claire turned. She turned at a sound she had not yet identified. Her smile was still in place from a joke she had just finished telling. The smile held for half a second after she saw him. Then her eyes shifted a fraction to the right, to the woman walking beside him, and the smile did not so much fall as forget itself. Brandon Cole beside her did not register the change at all. He was still laughing at his own reflection in someone's cufflinks. Jacob. Claire recovered first, as she always recovered first. She raised her glass and stepped forward to meet them, bright as a struck bell. "And I am sorry, I do not believe we have Vanessa Brooks." Vanessa's tone was perfectly even. "We have not. I came in late." Of course. Of course." Claire's eyes were doing arithmetic that her mouth had not caught up to. How do you two know each other?" "Jacob and I have worked together for almost a decade," Vanessa answered. "Oh," Claire laughed a half tone too high. "Oh, that is lovely. Small world. He never mentioned. He is quiet about his work." "Yes." Claire's smile pulled tight at the corners. "Yes, he always was. I used to tell him he should talk about himself more. Sell himself. He never did know how." She turned to the small crowd that had drifted closer, the press drifting closer with them, and Jacob watched her decide in real time what story she was going to tell. "You know it is so funny," Claire said, light bright, every word aimed for the cameras and not for him. Jacob and Miss Brooks must have crossed paths back when he was still well doing the architect thing, before he settled into being a homebody. A homebody. The word landed soft as a slap. The reporter from the finance magazine, the one who had been writing down everything Claire said an hour earlier, tilted her head and didn't write that one down. She was looking at Vanessa now. Everyone was looking at Vanessa now. Vanessa let the silence sit. She had a gift for letting silence sit. It was one of the first things Jacob had ever learned about her in a conference room a long time ago, that she never filled space she did not need to fill. "Excuse me," Vanessa said pleasantly to Claire, and to no one in particular. "My foundation is the lead sponsor tonight, and I am presenting in a few minutes. Jacob, the podium is this way." She moved on. Jacob moved with her. Behind them, Claire was still smiling, and the smile was beginning to look like something held in place by wires. The podium was on a low stage at the far end of the ballroom, between two enormous floral arrangements that smelled faintly of cold rain. A screen had been lowered from the ceiling behind it. Jacob stood at the edge of the stage, just out of the light, and Vanessa stepped up to the microphone, and the room came to her without being asked. "Thank you," she began. "I will be brief. I am told I am always brief, and I am told this is one of my few likable qualities." A polite ripple of laughter. "Tonight I want to talk to you about a building." The screen behind her woke. An architectural rendering bloomed across it in soft blues and whites, a tower along the Chicago River glass, folded into something that caught the light as water catches it. The lower floors opening into a public garden that wrapped beneath the structure like a held breath. Jacob had drawn the first version of that garden on the back of a placemat at a diner on Halsted Street 3 winters ago, after a sleepless night with a feverish 4-year-old. "This is the Riverside Project," Vanessa said. "It will break ground in the spring. It will be the largest mixed-use development my company has undertaken in 15 years. It represents a commitment of just over $1.8 billion, and it exists because of one architect." Jacob felt the room shift very slightly in his direction. Most of you do not know his name. That is partly because he is private, and partly because 2 years ago he walked into my office and told me he was stepping back from the work. He told me his daughter needed him more than my skyline did. I will be honest with you, I tried to talk him out of it. I failed. I have failed at very few things in my career, and I count that among them because I lost 2 years of his drawings. A small laugh warmer than the first. What I did not lose, she went on, was the design he had already given me. I have spent those 2 years building a team around it. Tonight, we are ready to begin. And tonight, for the first time, I would like to introduce him to the people who are going to fund it. She turned, and her hand opened toward the edge of the stage. Jacob Miller. Please. He stepped into the light. It is one thing to be looked at. It is another thing to be looked at by a room that has spent the last hour deciding you are smaller than you are. He felt every one of those looks recalibrate. He felt the trustee from the museum board straighten where he stood. He felt the hedge fund manager near the door set his glass down. He felt in the front of the small crowd that had pressed toward the stage, Claire Henderson, go very, very still. He did not give a speech. He had not been told he would need to. "Thank you, Vanessa," he said, and his voice carried more easily than he expected, the way it used to carry across drafting rooms before he had learned to speak softly for a child. "The building is yours now. I just drew it." That was all. He stepped back. The applause did not come at once. It came as weather comes a few hands first, then a dozen, then the whole room, and by the time it reached its full sound, there were people he had never met moving toward the stage with cards in their hands. The next half hour did not belong to him in any way he recognized. He shook hands. He answered questions about load-bearing and zoning and timelines, questions he could have answered in his sleep, and had answered in his sleep on red-eye flights on hospital chairs the night Lily had her tonsils out. A developer from Boston pressed a card into his palm and said something about a waterfront in Providence. A woman who introduced herself as a partner at one of the larger firms downtown asked, quite directly, what it would take to bring him back full-time. The trustee from the museum board approached and tried to begin a sentence 3 times before settling on. "Jacob, it has been too long." He was polite to all of them. He kept Lily's folded drawing in his coat pocket and kept one hand near it the way a man keeps one hand near a compass. He did not see Claire for the better part of that half hour. He saw at the edge of his vision that Brandon Cole had drifted toward the bar and was leaning there in a way that suggested he no longer understood what role he was being paid to play. A woman in green was talking to him. He was not really listening. He kept looking at Claire across the room, as a man looks at a car he has been told is his, but cannot find the keys to. Claire herself had moved twice. Once to a cluster of women she had arrived with, who were now politely turned 3/4 away from her. Once to the reporter from the finance magazine, who closed her notebook before Claire reached her and offered a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. Jacob was speaking with a quiet older man about a library in Evanston when he felt the touch at his elbow. "Jacob," Claire's voice close to his ear, low. "Can I borrow you for a moment?" "Please." The please was new. He had not heard her say please in something like 3 years. He excused himself from the older man. He let her lead him to one of the side alcoves, where the heavy curtains hung in folds, and the music thinned. The alcove had a small velvet bench in it, and a window looking out over Park Avenue, where snow had begun to fall in a thin, determined way. She did not sit. Neither did he. "You should have told me," she said. "Told you what? About her, about the project, about any of it." Her voice was tight, and underneath the tightness was something he had not heard in it for a very long time. Something almost like fear. "You let me stand up there, and you stood up there on your own, Claire. You let me make a fool of myself." He looked at her. The chandelier light from the ballroom caught the edge of her cheekbone and made something glitter there that he was not sure was a tear, and was not sure was not. "I did not let you do anything," he said quietly. "I came because Lily asked. You told me she wanted to see her parents in the same room. I came for that. I did not come for this." She drew a breath. She drew another. She looked at the window at the snow, at her own reflection in it, and her reflection did something her face was not quite doing yet. "Jacob." Her voice dropped, and she turned back to him, and there was a sudden brightness in her eyes that he recognized from a long marriage, the brightness she put on when she needed a thing and had decided how to ask for it. "Jacob, listen to me. We could fix this. Tonight. We could walk back out there together. Just for the cameras. Just enough to, Claire, to rewrite the story. That is all. A photograph. A smile. We do not have to mean it. We just have to." Claire. The word stopped her this time. He looked at her for a long moment, and in that moment, he understood with a clarity that surprised him by how little it hurt that she had not asked him to come tonight for Lily. Lily had not asked. Lily would never have asked. Lily had drawn her mother a horse and folded it into his coat without being told to, because that was who Lily was, quietly, generously, without an angle. Claire had asked him to come because she had wanted a small, dark figure standing behind her bright one. She had wanted a man to be smaller than her in front of cameras. She had wanted the contrast, and now that the contrast had gone the other way, she wanted him to step back into the frame she had built. "No," he said. That was all. He said it as Vanessa had let silence sit without filling it, without softening it, without explaining it. He turned and walked back into the light of the ballroom. He had not made it 10 steps when Claire's voice cut across the room behind him. She had followed him out of the alcove. "Miss Brooks." The pitch was new, louder than the alcove, brighter, the pitch of a woman who had decided that if she was going to be looked at, she was going to choose how. The conversations nearest the stage thinned at once. Heads turned for the second time that night. Vanessa Brooks, standing by the floral arrangement with a glass of water she had not drunk from, looked up. "Mrs. Henderson, I have to ask you something." Claire moved between 2 clusters of guests, and they parted for her, as guests at galas. Part for a woman about to make a scene, half stepping back, half leaning in. The reporter from the finance magazine reopened her notebook. A man near the bar lifted his phone very casually and angled the camera. "I have to, because I have known Jacob Miller for 15 years. I was married to him for 11 of them, and I am trying to understand." "Understand what?" "Why?" Claire's smile was still in place, but the smile was thin, now, almost transparent, a thing that had been used too long in one evening. "Why a woman like you, a woman who has built what you have built, would stand on that stage tonight and call an ordinary man, extraordinary. The room did not breathe. Vanessa set her glass down on the small table beside the arrangement. She did it slowly, deliberately, with the same economy she did everything. She looked down briefly at the rim of the glass, the only sign she had been weighing this answer for the better part of an hour, and then she lifted her eyes again. She looked at Claire, and she looked at Jacob, who had stopped halfway across the floor, and then she looked back at the room. Not at any one face, but at the whole of it, the way a person looks at a crowd before saying something she intends to be remembered. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, "I will answer you honestly, because I think there are a number of people in this room who are wondering the same thing, and they are too polite to ask." A faint, uncertain murmur. "I have been in business for 26 years. I have hired and I have fired more men than I can count. I have sat across from billionaires who could not look their own assistants in the eye. I have signed contracts with men whose names you would all recognize, men who would walk over their own children for a quarter point on a deal." Her voice did not rise. It did not have to. "And in 26 years, I have met exactly 4 men I would call genuinely extraordinary. Jacob Miller is one of them." She let that stand for a moment. "You asked me why. I will tell you why. 2 years ago, that man sat across from me in my office and turned down a contract worth more than most people in this room will see in a lifetime. He turned it down because his little girl had started having nightmares, and he had decided that nightmares were not something you outsource. He did not negotiate. He did not ask for a leave of absence. He did not ask me to hold the offer. He simply said, 'No, thank you,' and went home. Do you have any idea, Mrs. Henderson, how rare that is? Do you have any idea how many men in this room tonight would have taken the money and told themselves a story about being a good father later?" The murmur had gone entirely quiet. "You called him a homebody," Vanessa said. "I heard you. The whole room heard you. I want to be very clear about what that word means, because I think it has been used incorrectly tonight. A homebody, in my understanding of the term, is a man who built a home, who maintained one, who put a child to bed every night for the years a child needs to be put to bed every night, and who did it without expecting a magazine cover for it. The men who get magazine covers, Mrs. Henderson, are not usually the men who do the work. They are the men who outsource it and take the credit when the child turns out well." A small, sharp sound from somewhere near the bar. A glass set down too quickly. "I do not know what kind of marriage you had. That is not my business, and I would not pretend it was. But I will tell you what I know, because I watched it happen from the other side of a conference table. Your husband walked away from a career most architects in this country would have killed for, and he walked away quietly, without making anyone else feel small for staying. That is not boring, Mrs. Henderson. That is character. And character is the rarest commodity I trade in." Vanessa picked her glass back up. She took finally a single sip of water. "I called him extraordinary because he is. I would have called him that 2 years ago, and I will call him that 20 years from now. I am sorry if that answer disappoints you." She set the glass down again. The silence that followed was not the polite silence of a party. It was the silence of a room that had just watched something be settled. Claire's mouth opened. Nothing came out of it. The smile was gone now, not fallen, but simply gone the way a light goes when the bulb finishes. Her hand trembled once around the stem of her champagne glass, and she set it down on the nearest table as quietly as she could, the small, careful movement of a woman trying very hard not to be heard. She looked for the first time that evening like a woman of her actual age, standing under a chandelier that was too bright for her. The reporter wrote in a clean, clear hand every word Vanessa had said. Jacob stepped forward. He did not step forward angrily. He did not step forward to finish anything. He stepped forward because Vanessa had spoken on his behalf, and she had spoken well. And now there was one small thing left that only he could say. "I'd like to add something," he said. His voice was quiet, as it had always been quiet, and the room leaned in to hear it. "If that's all right." No one objected. He looked at the floor for a second, and then he looked at Claire, and there was no cruelty in the look. There was no triumph. There was only the calm of a man who had stopped somewhere in the last hour, being afraid of what a room of strangers thought of him. "Miss Brooks is generous," he said. "She has always been generous. But I want to be clear about something because I think the cameras are on, and I would rather have it on the record in my own words." He took a breath. "I am proud of the building. I am proud of the work. I am grateful that any of it is going forward. But none of that is what I am proudest of. The thing I am proudest of in my whole life is a small girl who is asleep right now in a house in Chicago. Her name is Lily. She is 8. She drew a horse for her mother today and asked me to deliver it, and I have it in my coat pocket, and I am going to take a plane home in a few hours and read her a bedtime story tomorrow night. And that is the work I would not trade for any skyline in this country." He looked at Claire one more time. His voice did not change. "That is not a small life, Claire. It never was." She did not answer. She could not have answered. There was nothing in her face to answer with. Brandon Cole at the bar set his drink down on the marble counter. He looked once at Claire across the room, a long, flat look that was neither cruel nor kind, only finished, and then he walked out of the ballroom without looking back. No one watched him go. No one would remember the next morning that he had ever been there. The reporter closed her notebook. The trustee from the museum board who had not looked at Jacob earlier in the evening moved through the crowd now and put a hand on Jacob's shoulder briefly, as men of his generation and his profession put hands on shoulders when they do not know how to apologize. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Vanessa stepped down from the stage. "Jacob," she said, low, close, "if you have a minute." He had a minute. She led him to the quiet end of the ballroom near the tall windows, where the snow had thickened over Park Avenue. She did not speak immediately. She watched the snow for a few seconds, as she had watched it through her entire speech, and then she turned to him. "I meant what I said up there, all of it. But there is something else I should have said, and I would like to say it now, before you get on that plane." She looked at him steadily. "Come back to work. Not because we need a name on the project. We have your name on the project. Come back because the next building is sitting in a drawer in your house in Chicago, and I would like to build it. On your terms, your hours, your city. I will fly the team to you. I will fly myself to you. I have done it before for men who deserved it less." He was quiet for a moment. "Vanessa, I am not asking for an answer tonight. I know. I am asking you to think about it on the plane." He looked past her at the snow, at his own faint reflection in the dark window, at the city of New York spread out cold and bright, beyond it. He thought of Lily. He thought of the horse folded in his pocket. He thought of the fact that he had not in 2 years drawn a single line for himself, and that there were nights, quiet nights, after she was asleep, when his hand had reached for a pencil and stopped ashamed of wanting something. "I'll think about it," he said. "Good." That was all. He picked his coat up from the cloakroom himself. He had not given it to the attendant when he arrived. He had folded it over his arm because the drawing was in the pocket, and he had not wanted it out of his sight. He walked out through the gold doors, and Vanessa walked out beside him, and the cameras at the entrance lifted for them now, in a way they hadn't lifted when he came in. He did not stop for any of them. The last thing he saw of the ballroom glancing back through the closing doors was Claire Henderson standing alone beneath her chandelier. The cluster of women who had arrived with her had drifted not unkindly, but completely into other conversations. The reporter was speaking to someone else. The light was still falling on Claire, as it had fallen on her all evening, but the light no longer seemed to be looking at her. She was holding her empty hands now at her sides, fingers half curled around nothing like a child who had been asked to hold something and had forgotten what. The doors closed. The flight to Chicago left at 6 in the morning. He slept for most of it, the drawing of the horse flat against his chest inside his coat. The sky over Lake Michigan was the color of a bruise turning back into skin when the plane began its descent. He took a cab from the airport. The snow over Lincoln Park had set hard overnight, and the brownstone when he climbed the steps looked as it had looked when he left quiet, warm, a single light on in the upstairs window, where the babysitter had said she would wait. He turned the key as softly as he could. He did not need to. The small thunder of bare feet was already coming down the stairs before the door had finished opening, and then she was there, all 8 years of her, in the astronaut pajamas, with the stuffed rabbit dangling by one ear, her hair on one side, flattened from sleep, and on the other side, wild. "Daddy." She hit him at the knees and stayed there. He set the coat down on the bench by the door. He knelt. He gathered her up as he had gathered her up every morning of her life, and she pressed her face into his neck and stayed pressed there for a long time, the way children do when they have been pretending all night not to be worried. "Daddy," she said into his collar, "did you miss the party?" He thought about it. He thought about the chandelier and the laughter and the marble corridor. He thought about Vanessa's voice low, and even telling a roomful of cameras what a man was worth. He thought about Claire alone under that light. He thought about Brandon Cole walking out into the snow unremembered. He thought about a drawing of a horse folded in a coat pocket that had traveled to New York and back without ever needing to be delivered to anyone but the person who had drawn it. He thought about the man who had stood at this same door 18 hours ago, knotting a tie in the mirror, trying to make himself smaller for a room that had already decided he was small. He drew back enough to look at his daughter's face. "No, sweetheart," he said. "I did not miss the party. I think tonight I just found my way back to myself." She did not understand that. She was 8. She nodded anyway, the way children nod at the important things adults say, and then she tugged at his hand and pulled him toward the stairs because the rabbit had a story to finish, and she had been waiting up to hear it. He let her pull him. The light in the upstairs window stayed on a little longer, warm against the snow, and then very gently it went out.